Hi there. Welcome to Cook Local, Eat Local, the podcast where you can find inspiration, tips, and recipes for enjoying more local food and drink. I am David Crowley, your host. In today's episode, we'll be talking with Angi Schneider about ideas for this week's vegetables and how we can preserve fresh local produce. Angi lives in a small homestead along the Texas Gulf Coast with her husband and children. For over 30 years, they have been living their own version of the simple life by reducing their dependence on commercial products and living a DIY lifestyle. Hello, Angi. Welcome to Cook Local, Eat Local.
Well, hi, David. I'm so excited to be here and chat with you about local food.
Excellent. Looking forward to the conversation. I know you have some definite expertise that we want to hone in on and how, in terms of how people can preserve their food, as well as just tasty recipe ideas, which is more my forte. Definitely want to learn from you about the preserving food, but let's start with some basics. How did you get interested in cooking in the first place? I tend to have guests on here, some that have been cooking since they were real small, this high, or smaller off screen, short. Others picked it up later. But where do you stand in that?
Well, not there. When my husband and I got married, we, between the two of us, we could scramble eggs, make spaghetti, and fry fish. So that was it. It was a start, yes. And so obviously that's not very sustainable, especially once you start adding children into the mix. And so just slowly over the years, we decided that we were going to cook from scratch. Early in our marriage, my husband found a dewberry patch, which is a local wild blackberry here. And my granny was the only one that I knew who had canned, and she lived 8 hours away. So I called her and I asked her for her super secret recipe for making dewberry jam. And she told me to go to the store and buy a box of Sure-Gel and follow the directions.
Oh my.
Which was
keeping it secret, or
I was like,
was that her secret?
That wasn't like the secret I was thinking you were going to tell me. I thought it was going to be hard and complicated. And but what that did for me, my granny was a no-nonsense woman who just said things like it is. She didn't have time for drama or nonsense, as she would call it.
Yeah.
And so, but what that did for me was it gave me some confidence. I mean, she was like, you can read, you can follow directions, you can do it. And so I've just kind of carried that mentality into everything we've done, like whether it's cooking or a home project or whatever. Well, we can read, we can follow directions. We might as well try it.
Yeah.
And so, and of course, this was we've been married 33 years. So this was way before the internet was a thing. You would check out books from the library to learn something new or, so that's kind of how I started. It's just been a slow progress, slow baby steps over the years.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm pretty similar on the cooking front, but I haven't taken the steps into some of the things you do in terms of preserving food. So we do want to get into that. But maybe first, if you want to set a little more context, and, I was looking at your bio and you mentioned living on a homestead, and clearly your Creative Simple Living website focuses a lot on tips for, as you say, the simple life. So how did, from that one canning project, tell us a little bit more about what you're doing now, sort of how you, your framework for thinking about simple living?
Sure. I crave simplicity, and that looks very different, I think, for everybody. Like what simplicity is. When people look at my life, they may be like, oh, that is not simple at all. You drive your daughter to dance an hour, 30 minutes each way every single day. But for us, that's important to our family. And so we work that into what we view as simple living. And so my site is really about how can I help someone figure out their version of the simple life. My husband always says, well, you can have it all. You just can't have it all at the same time. And so there's these give and takes that we have to do. And so I was thinking this morning about what do I think the commonality is for simple living? Yeah. And I really think that it is about having margin in your life, having margin in your time and in your finances, in your relationships, and even in your possessions.
Mm-hmm.
And how that works out in everyone's life is going to be a little bit different. But I've been in a season, and how that looks in different seasons is going to be different too, of one person's life, right? So when I had a whole bunch of little kids, we have 6 children. When I had my first 5 kids in 8 years, it was a little chaotic.
I can only imagine. We only have one, and that keeps
Yeah.
our hands full. But
Yes.
5 and
Yes.
8 years. Whew.
Yeah. So it was a lot. And so, but there were things that we did then that I don't do now,
Mm-hmm.
and there's things that I do now that I couldn't have done then because
Right.
the priorities are different. And so as life goes on, even within one person's life, how you live simply might change.
Yeah.
So, but I really think that just having this margin so that you can say, yes, I'm perfectly fine with taking my daughter to dance and spending an hour in the car to do that every single day because I've decided not to do other things that day.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I was just, it's interesting. I don't know if you've read the book or heard of the book 4,000 Weeks. I read it a couple of years ago, but I was just listening to a podcast where his reference it reminded me, and it has some similar concepts. He really focused on, our time is short, and that if you're not intentional about things, you can wind up spending a lot of time doing things that might be like, they're not things you hate, but they're not your top priorities either, but
Mhm.
they eat up time that takes away from what's truly important. So like you're saying, driving your daughter to dance, you prioritize that and made a choice and build things around it. So I definitely like the concepts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we are going to circle back in a few minutes. I think, getting some practical tips of people who are intrigued about that concept and how they might apply it. But first, we always promise on these shows, people are going to get some recipe ideas and maybe some techniques for
Sure.
preserving perhaps some of the food that is fresh and local in our area here in New England that I landed in my CSA farm share. So I think you said one thing you'd like to talk about is cherry tomatoes. Let's start there. I just had a few topping my hearty salad that I made for lunch. So what else? Salad's an obvious one. I'm guessing you
Yes.
might have some more ideas for cherry tomatoes beyond that.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So they can be fermented, which is really great in the saltwater
Fermented?
brine.
Really?
Fermented, yes. Really,
Wow.
with some fresh basil. They're really tasty. They're like these they get kind of soft, and when you eat them, there's like this pop of flavor. They're so good. If you like tomatoes, they're really good. I know some people don't like that, don't
Yeah.
like cherry tomatoes. Um, so a recipe that we really like with our cherry tomatoes is we like to just put them on a sheet pan. Like this is just for dinner, right?
Yeah.
Put them on a sheet pan with a little bit of feta cheese, some olive oil, some fresh herbs, basil, oregano, whatever. And then we broil that or, roast it.
Yeah.
And then we turn it into a sauce for pasta. It's very
Yeah.
rich. Go light on the feta. I don't really have a recipe. We just toss it all in, together.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, it's so good. So good. And then I dehydrate a lot of cherry tomatoes
Oh, okay.
Because they don't have a lot of meat on them for canning, right?
Sure. Right.
So I usually do a few jars of fermented tomatoes, and then the rest I just cut in half and dehydrate. And you can use those. You can rehydrate them and make a soup with them, or add them to your sauces to give them a little bit of bulk.
Oh, okay.
You can also grind them into a powder so that you can so that you can
grind
make
the dry
grind the dry, yes, grind the dehydrated tomatoes into a powder. And then I don't know if you've ever seen like there's a tomato bouillon that you can buy, so I use it kind of like that. I season rice with it or add it to soup that I want more of a tomatoey flavor. So
that's definitely a creative idea. Okay, cool. And the fermented tomatoes, wow, I don't think I've heard of fermenting cherry tomatoes. Well, that's a great idea. So, all right, what do you have for moving on, I guess, to leeks? I have a batch of leeks, and it's one of those things. There are a couple things I tend to do with it, and one of the things I love about hosting the show, I usually wind up with a bunch of new ideas to try to expand my repertoire.
Sure. So there's not like a bunch of preserving recipes for leeks, right? Like you
Mhm.
can't can them by themselves, but you can them as part of a soup. So like a
Oh,
potato
sure.
leek soup is really
Yep.
great. You have to have a pressure canner to do that, obviously, or maybe not obviously. You have to have a pressure canner
Yeah.
to do that safely. Don't
Uh-huh.
believe what you read on the internet about not using a pressure canner for soups. You have to.
Mm.
Um, then I like you can dehydrate them again. So a lot of times I'll use the white part, the really yummy part
Yeah.
for a soup or to stir fry. I put it in sauteed vegetables or
Mhm.
a Thai bowl or something like that. Then I'll take the grains and I'll dehydrate those and then
Mm.
I powder them and then use them
Okay.
for a seasoning.
So how are you what's your method for like dehydrating the tomatoes or the leeks?
So I have several dehydrators. I have
Mhm.
one that I bought probably 20 years ago for $5 at a garage sale.
Wow.
It and then when I wrote my books several years ago, I invested in a Excalibur, which is kind of like the high end
Yeah.
dehydrator because I'd never had one, and I thought I should really try it out and see if it's really that much better. And
Mhm.
I do like it better for some things.
Mhm.
But if I were starting out, I wouldn't wait until I
Mhm.
could afford an Excalibur to start dehydrating.
Yeah.
A lot of times you can find them as long as they plug in and have some airflow.
Mhm.
If you find them at a thrift store, they're going to be just fine. It's
Mhm.
great if they have a dial where you can adjust the temperature. But I
Oh,
have
okay.
one that doesn't, and I
Yep.
just make sure I don't put herbs in there. I don't put like real tender things in there.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So yeah, so I just use the dehydrator. Herbs I hang
Mhm.
and just let them naturally dry, or I just put them out on a mesh tray,
Mhm.
um, a dehydrator tray, but I don't actually stick it in the dehydrator.
Oh, okay.
Just leave them out.
Oh,
And
interesting.
we live
Okay.
in a humid environment because we live on the Texas Gulf Coast, but of
Yep.
course we have air conditioning. So it's not like we have our windows open all summer.
Yeah.
But they dehydrate just fine in a few days laying out.
Oh, okay. I need to try that more. Yeah, I always get this rush feeling like for fresh basil or something, which goes lucky if it lasts a day or two,
Yeah.
without
Okay.
doing
So
something.
basil, you can dehydrate basil, but it retains its flavor much better if you freeze it.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah. Do you just freeze it, or do you make
yeah,
pesto, or just
you
freeze
can
it?
do pesto. I love freezing pesto. We go through a lot of pesto in my home. But if I have a lot and I'm just pressed for time, I'll just pull off those leaves and stick it in a Ziploc baggie and throw it in the freezer. The same
Okay.
thing with cilantro. Cilantro does much better frozen. No, it's not the same. Like you're not
Yeah.
gonna pull
Sure.
it out and have these beautiful leaves.
Yeah.
But the flavor is nice. The flavor is so much more intense. So
Mhm.
like if you did it with cilantro, you wouldn't use it for pico de gallo, but you could
Yeah.
certainly use it in your beans or rice.
Right.
Something that's
Something that's
cooked.
getting cooked. Yeah.
Yeah,
That makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
Okay.
Those two especially do much better frozen.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good to know. Okay. Cool. Now, the last one on my list is kale. So,
Uh-huh.
kale's, we seem to get a lot of it in the CSA here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, because it's so easy to grow. It's
yeah.
so great and versatile. Yeah. So kale can be canned with a pressure canner by itself, just like
Hmm.
pretty much any other green. Not cabbage, but other greens can
Yeah.
can be done. That is pretty tasty if you like cooked greens. You can freeze it.
Mhm.
It's better if it's blanched first
Yep.
before and then dried and then frozen.
Okay. Yeah.
So a lot of times people will chop it up and put it in like muffin tins and freeze it, and then you've got like just this block
Yep.
that you can toss into a soup or a stir fry.
Hmm.
I dehydrate a lot. And then we make a green powder, and I just throw any greens in there, like
Huh.
leftover. So I really try hard to use everything that we've harvested
Yeah.
or that we've purchased.
Yeah.
So not to be obsessive about it, but I just, we've spent money on it and I
Sure.
want to
Yeah.
make the most of that. And that goes back to having that margin.
Yeah.
So I take, the little bits and ends of greens and I'll dehydrate them and then make a powder and we'll add it to smoothies or we'll we'll sprinkle some in rice. Sometimes my kids are like, what are these green flakes in the rice?
Right.
Like, it's just veggies, honey. It's fine. Just eat it.
Yeah.
You can't taste it. It adds some extra nutrition.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, that's a great idea. Nice. And you referenced this, I was going to ask, and you referenced it again. Sounds like you're growing some of your own food, or a good amount. You want to elaborate
We
on
used to grow more than we grow now.
that?
Five of our older five children are all adults and married and not here. I mean,
Yeah.
not living in our home, obviously.
Right.
So our family is much smaller. Our workforce is much smaller too.
Sure.
That's been an interesting transition. Also, my husband was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer 4 years ago. So our life is just very different than it was.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And so I do grow some. We usually grow a spring garden and a fall garden. And fall meaning because we have a very mild climate, we go usually from September, October through July of the next year. So our break is usually from July through September-ish.
Oh, okay.
It's so hot.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I will say, as it goes back to margin, I have decided that this fall I'm not going to grow anything, because I've had other projects that have been kind of put on the, to the back burner. Yeah. And I feel like we just really need to take care of those, and I don't have time to do it all, right? Yeah. But I was, I am working on some front flower beds, and so even if you don't live on an, acreage, even if you live in an apartment, you can still grow things. You can grow, a lot of herbs can be grown in pots. I've decided that I'm going to tuck some Swiss chard in my front flower beds because it's beautiful and nobody will know, right? And so you just throw some seeds out and they'll grow.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So it's a good point. You don't have to have a huge garden necessarily to do something.
Yeah.
Excellent. So we want to talk a little bit, because it's obviously your expertise. You've alluded to some tips in terms of drying food and stuff, but someone like me who tries to furiously figure out how to cook everything while it's fresh, which is fine, but as you get a bounty of crops at this, especially this time of year. Preserving is, think of ways to preserve. I do freeze some stuff. I guess that's one thing I do. What, for somebody who's fairly new to this, what would you think are some easy steps to get started?
Sure. I think first of all, utilizing your freezer is so important. Yeah. Right. Like if there is something that's not going to be used up, for the most part, you can probably just chop it up and freeze it.
Yep.
And then eventually figure out something to do with it, put it in a soup or a rice or something. Especially because I don't know, do you get a CSA during the winter, or is it just around?
I'm pretty, I have my fingers in a lot of pots. I do a seasonal CSA, that's stuff that's growing, out in a traditional farm that runs through like the fall, but then there's a cool local food delivery service here that what they do, it's called Share Family Dinner, and they source from a bunch of local farms, and they provide, you can choose, I just want veggies, or I want some meat or fish and that sort of thing as well. And
that's nice. Yeah.
So it's fun. And so I do get that. I do more of that in the winter. So, and those tend to be things that come from, certain things that I think like the greens grow pretty well in different kinds of greenhouse environments, right? Stuff like that.
Yeah. But you want to preserve like your tomatoes because you want to get those in the winter. Yeah. So I think that's first is utilizing your freezer. So especially if you don't have any kind of other food preserving equipment, that first. Then I would say probably some simple dehydration next, because you can pretty much dehydrate again almost anything. It's different, and that is something that I want to say too. When you've preserved food, regardless of the preservation method, it is not going to taste like it did fresh.
Right.
It's going to be different. The texture is probably going to be different. The flavor may be a little different, and it's not necessarily bad. It's just different. And so as long as, I think that we just all need to be aware of that. And I think that most of us probably are, because we know that frozen veggies are not really quite the same as fresh, right?
Sure.
So, and then fermentation is another great way. Not everything is good fermented, but there are quite a few things that are really good fermented. And fermentation is actually the only preservation method that increases the nutrition of the actual product. So everything else, decreases the nutrition a little bit. Right. And so fermentation is really great. And it can be as simple as, cutting up some cabbage and making a quick sauerkraut. Sauerkraut is really just cabbage and salt.
Yeah. Right.
That's been fermented. We really like fermented pickles, like cucumber pickles. Those are really good. So I prefer to use a mason jar and an airlock. There's some called Nourished Essentials.
Yep.
And it doesn't. You don't have. It's not a water lock. You don't have to put the water thing in there. I don't even know what it's called. But those work great. Now, people have been fermenting food for thousands of years without any kind of special equipment. Right? I just think that this is the no-brainer way to do it. You don't have to be. Sure. If you forget about it, it's not going to get moldy. If it's just it's just a little more user-friendly.
Right. Can you speak to, I think, for some of us that haven't really gotten into that, like, I think maybe there's a little nervousness about if I do something wrong, I'm going to kill our family or something like that. What are some, I don't know if those are legitimate concerns or if, there's some basic things that you do to avoid any kind of food sickness. Yeah. So for sure, you will know with fermentation, there's not quite the risk that there would be of doing something wrong with, say, pressure canning, where you've got botulism, right. That could be a possibility, because fermentation is an acidic environment. So what happens is some bacteria cannot grow in an acidic environment, and then some bacteria grows well in an acidic environment. Yeah. So some of the bacteria that grows well is the same bacteria that's really good for our gut. So so it is, vegetable fermentation is all based upon using a saltwater brine. Right. Some vegetables, like cabbage, that have a lot of liquid in them, you would shred and you would massage the salt into the cabbage, and that would create its brine. Yep. Others, like, say, cucumbers, that you would ferment whole, like for pickles, you would make a saltwater brine and pour over them. So there's a ratio. I would say most vegetables ferment in a brine that's between 3 and 4% salt. Okay. Yep. So you would measure out your water in grams, and then you would multiply that by 3%, and then that's how much salt you would have. My first book, The Ultimate Guide to Preserving Vegetables, has the vegetables all in each. There's a chapter for each of the most common vegetables. Oh, perfect. And within that, there's how to freeze, dehydrate, can, and ferment that vegetable. Oh, great. But you can look online too. There's guides for, I think, cucumbers is 3.5%, peppers is like 4%. So that's the important thing. You need to have, it's going to taste salty at first, but the longer that you let it sit, the less salty it's going to be. And you can use a pH meter even if you have one, if you're nervous. I was in a class recently and they did this, and you need to get the pH at 4.6 or below. Okay. And so it would, like with the cabbage, once it got salted and massaged and put in a jar, it was within 30 minutes that it was at 4.6. Oh, wow. So it was amazing. So, so there's very little, like, you're going to kill your family. Right. That's good. That's good. Yeah. And you'll know, you'll know if you open it up and it smells like disgusting, or it's got pink growth on it. You'll be like, I think I'll just throw this away and clean out my jar with some bleach. Yeah. We got to trust our senses. That's usually the most reliable of anything for food safety. Yeah. But not to say other things aren't.
Probably is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What, so you referenced your first book. Does that also cover, some of the different types of equipment, basic equipment, that one
Yes.
needs?
Yeah. It covers all the equipment that you would need. So those three, the freezer, the dehydrator, and the fermenting, are probably the least expensive ways to get into preserving food.
Mm-hmm.
I would say water bath canning would be next, because you can use any old big pot that you want, as long as you have like something on the bottom to keep the jars off the bottom.
Yep.
Of course, you have to invest in canning jars and lids. And the metal lids are not reusable for canning. You can use them for dry storage, but you can't, once they've been used for canning, you don't want to use them again. So water bath canning is good for high acid foods. So jams, jellies, pickles, any kind of pickles.
Yeah.
Some tomato recipes.
I was going to ask about
can be water
pasta
bath
sauce when you
cans.
said
Yes.
sick. Yeah.
Yeah. You do have to acidify most tomato recipes with some citric acid or lemon juice, and the recipe will tell you.
Yeah.
Even if you're going to pressure can it, because that's how the testing was done on it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the more expensive, but I feel like the most useful preservation method would be pressure canning.
Yeah.
And so that would be for your vegetables, legumes, meats. And you can buy at Walmart a pressure canner for about $80.
Oh,
it does the job.
Considering the amount you'd save.
Right, exactly. So I had years ago, my mom gave me an all-American canner where I can double stack. It's huge, it's massive, and it's like $500.
Wow.
And so I would have never purchased it, and I'm very thankful that she did, but it led me to be kind of a pressure canning snob.
Yeah.
Like I truly thought that was the best one. Like, when I started writing the books, I was like, maybe I should test that out. And so I went and found the cheapest pressure canner that met the USDA guidelines. And it was a Presto at Walmart for $79. And I brought it home and I used it, and it worked just fine.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, that was smart too, because when we're content creators, sometimes, we're into this stuff. So sometimes we want to do the fancier, the next level things, which most of your readers are probably not at that point. Don't need a $500 version.
Exactly. And I would have never purchased that on my own, ever. And so I just believed the hype about like, it's the best. And so I really want to encourage people that you don't have to have this, what everyone else says is top of the line. It just needs to have the requirements that make it safe.
Yeah, sure. So that's important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Can you, you've talked about some things that are a little like drying this and that, and the powder and the vegetables. At the end of the day, I know you want to preserve your food, but can you give us a few examples of some tasty things you've made recently that maybe utilize some of these ingredients? Paint the picture. Let's try to get people salivating a little to say, oh, okay, it's not all stuff that's going to taste like I'm really downgrading my culinary experience, but I looked at your website. It looks like you got some really tasty stuff.
Yeah, so absolutely. I'm a firm believer in that food should taste good. Even simple food should taste really, really good. And so, let me think. What are some things? I shared about the tomatoes that we really love.
Yeah, that does sound good.
Those cherry tomatoes and make a sauce with it. We always, every summer, basil grows really well here. So we make pesto and we freeze it.
Yeah.
And so one of our favorite things is just to saute some vegetables, boil some noodles, and then toss all of that together with some pesto.
Yeah.
And so let's see. We harvested, a local farm here this summer had a deal where it's a U-Pick farm, but they also sell at the farmer's market. And so they had sent out a message and said, hey, our potatoes are ready. We've dug them up. We've taken the tractor out there and we've dug them up. For every 3 buckets that you pick up, you get to take one home free, and we'll keep 2 to sell.
Wow.
And so my 15-year-old daughter and I went out and we picked up 40 pounds of potatoes, like
Wow.
for us to keep. Like, so I guess we picked
Oh
up
my goodness.
more than
That's a lot
that.
of potatoes.
Like, it was just fun, it was just fun being out there with her, and
Mhm.
digging potatoes is fun. And so when we came home, we we did various things. One of the things was that I did was I made potato and leek soup. I canned some, and you can't can it with the cream. So there are some things that you have to leave
right.
out when you can, right? So it's like this base that we'll do, but it is so good. And then we mashed a whole bunch of potatoes, like 10 pounds of potatoes. We added some butter and cream cheese to them. My granny's special seasoned salt.
Yeah.
that she used to make, and then we froze them in Ziploc bags. And so potatoes don't normally freeze well, but if you add cream cheese, they freeze very well.
That's interesting.
It is very interesting. So,
so like
then,
cut up and stuff, you mean, and then with cream cheese?
yeah, so like just mash it with cream cheese.
Oh, mash with cream. Okay.
Yeah, mash it with your butter and cream cheese, and then we have those. So we usually have pork loin, every week or two.
Yeah.
And so we'll make the pork loin. We have these mashed potatoes that are already prepared. They just need to be put in a pot and heated up. They look very watery when you first put them in the pot, but as they cook, they'll thicken up and be just like fresh. And who does not love mashed potatoes whenever you feel like having mashed potatoes?
Oh, that is great. Yeah. Yeah, I love mashed potatoes. Okay.
Right? I think everyone loves mashed potatoes. Yeah. Yeah. So, and pork loin is really it's one of those things that when we cook it, because there's only 3 of us now, I'll make the whole pork loin, but I'll undercook it just a little bit. And then I'll cut it into thirds. We'll finish cooking the 1/3 for that night, and then we'll take the other 2/3 and we'll cut them into serving size pieces, and then I will freeze those. And then the next time we have it, we'll pull those out, and we call them pork loin steaks, and we'll just put them in the pan to cook.
That's
and
good,
again, they're so good. Those crispy edges of the pork loin, so good.
Yeah,
if you're a meat eater, I guess not everyone's a meat eater, but we are.
Yeah, no, and I like pork too. I like it too, in part because it doesn't have a, usually it goes even better if you have some kind of sauce or top it, something like that. I tend to like that,
Yeah, that's really good.
That's very good. Wow, yeah, I'm definitely getting hungry. Some good ideas. So maybe, we could probably talk all day about this, but you probably have things to do. You sound like all these projects. I'm imagining you look like I can see you must have a lot going on in your kitchen. So you mentioned, maybe give us where people can find more about the resources you have, and give your book titles and all that good stuff.
Oh, sure.
They sound very helpful.
Yeah, sure. So my site is Creative Simple Living, and you can get there by going to creativesimpleliving.com or schneiderpeeps.com.
Okay.
Because when it started, it was all about my family.
Yeah. Okay.
So I have both URLs. They go to the exact same place, though.
Yeah.
On social media, I'm Schneider Peeps or Creative Simple Living with Angi Schneider. I've written 2 books that were published by Page Street Publishing. One is The Ultimate Guide to Preserving Vegetables, which is honestly the book I wish I had when I first started learning about preserving vegetables and started cooking. And so, like I said, every chapter is its own. If you have tomatoes coming in, you can open it up and you'll get all the different ways to preserve tomatoes and 10 tomato recipes for preserving them. And then my second book is Pressure Canning for Beginners and Beyond. And it is from the very basics of pressure canning. And then there's, I don't know, 90 something recipes for pressure canning. But each section has very just step-by-step how-to. What are the tested safe ways to pressure can legumes, and what can you do with meat and what can't you do with meat?
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, so what we can do is certainly, I assume people can get those from your website. I can also, if there's a direct link, we'll put those in the show
Sure.
notes.
They're also,
where they
they're
can
also at
purchase.
Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, all the major
Excellent.
booksellers have
Super.
them too.
Yeah, those sound like very helpful resources. So
Mm.
we will encourage people to check out your website and get one of those books. I think I'm gonna have to get that, especially that first one. I think the pressure canning might be the phase 2 for me or something.
Yeah.
But excellent. It's been a pleasure. You've been chock full of useful information, and I know our listeners will really appreciate hearing from you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, David. It's been a really great afternoon.
Great. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Cook Local, Eat Local. To get the show notes with links for recipes and resources we covered today, go to cooklocaleatlocal.com to get the podcast landing page. And please be sure to subscribe to Cook Local, Eat Local wherever you get your podcasts. Make it a great day with some tasty local food on your plate.